the University of California, San Diego. For the last 10 years, she was a lecturer in anthropology at Princeton University, where she has taught courses in South Asian literature and culture. Her published books include works on criticism, Sri Lankan theatre, Buddhist literature in Sri Lanka, and a collection of short stories. Ani Choying Drolma is founder of the Nuns Welfare Foundation of Nepal. She is an internationally reputed singer of Buddhist hymns and chants, and I'm sure you've had the pleasure of hearing her at the venue today and yesterday. She has founded the Aryatara School in 2000 for nuns, which runs with the help of proceeds from her concerts, tours, CD sales, and donations. She's author of My Voice for Freedom. Right next to me is Kunzang Choden, who was born in central Bhutan and writes on folklore, culture, and women. Her book, The Circle of Karma, was the first novel to come from Bhutan. Her other published works include folktale collections, short stories, and children's books. She works closely with the Bhutan's Nuns Foundation, and I hope we have an interesting discussion on women on the path and in the Buddha's Sangha today. I would like to begin this discussion by asking the panel something about what they think. Let's start at the beginning, and let's look at something that has impacted the way women are perceived and the way that women are treated in Buddhism, and that is the Buddha's initial hesitation when a group of women, which included his aunt Mahaprajapati, came to him and asked to be ordained in the Sangha. And he hesitated and actually refused thrice. And there was, I mean, this is the story that I know, and there was an intervention from Ananda, his close attendant and his cousin, who said, but don't you think that women also have the potential to achieve nirvana? And of course, the Buddha could not say no to that, so he said, yes, I agree with that. So, so they were admitted into the Sangha, but it is said that the Buddha lamented that without them, his dharma would have lasted 1,000 years, and with them, it might only for about 500. Now, that's one of the issues, because this is one thing that has been debated, whether the Buddha actually said this or it was a later interpolation. But the Dharma has survived for about 2,500 years now and going strong. So I would like to ask Ranjini to start this discussion by telling us something about how this has colored the way that women are perceived and treated in the Buddha's Sangha.
I think that historically, if we study the path of nuns or path of women who have become nuns, you see ups and downs in terms of the social world. And at the beginning, the Buddha was working and living and starting an organization within a certain social structure. And he was very aware of the positives and the negatives and how he was going to do it. The other thing, my reading of the text, the Buddha was never rigid about his rules. He changed them depending on the needs of the situation. And so when he was first asked to include women in the social context of 5th century India, he was hesitant because he felt there were problems socially. He was asked twice, and then the third time, when the women came, when Prajapati Gautami and her troop of 500 women came to him and asked him again, you know, they shaved their heads, they wore robes, and they walked the distance to where he was. At that point, he refused again, but then Ananda said, look, do women have the intellectual ability to reach nirvana? And he said, yes. Then he said, in that case, why don't you allow them? And finally, the Buddha thought about it and allowed it. And at that point, the order of nuns was highly respected. Some of them were brilliant speakers who would give very good sermons, and they spread themselves out across the country teaching the doctrine. But over the years, I think changes took place. And I know in Sri Lanka, by the 11th century AD, the order of nuns had totally disappeared. I think with the social troubles, the wars, the lack of support for nunneries and monks, even the male monk order in Sri Lanka disappeared by about the 14th, 15th century AD. And the kings then sent to Thailand to reordain and re-establish the order of monks. And that happened with the order of monks, but they didn't do anything about the nuns. And to this day, they have not been able to get an order of bhikkhunis, that is equivalent to the monks, because you can only be ordained if you have a quorum of nuns to ordain you. And they have no nuns. So now they've been going around the world, and I think China or Korea, one of them has been ordained, and they have ordained bhikkhunis in Sri Lanka, and there are established communities of bhikkhunis. But of course, the controversy is still going on as to whether all the monks are going to accept them. And so that's historically the situation. There have been ups and downs, and right now it's a down beginning to go up in our country.
Anila, I just wanted to, as an addendum to that, what Ranjini said, when the Buddha did accept nuns into the monastic Sangha, there were certain extra conditions that were laid down.
Yes.
And the women's Sangha was kept subordinate to the men's Sangha. And Mahaprajapati said, I will accept these rules as a, she said, I think as a garland or as a crown. And she accepted them on behalf of everybody, all the women, right down to you. So what is your, because since you are an ordained member of the monastic Sangha, how does this play out in daily life, and how do you look at this?
First of all, good morning. Well, I'm not good at historical stories, actually. But yet, in my real practical life, from the very beginning stage, since I entered the nunnery, in our nunnery, once a year there is a big ceremony takes place called Drupchin, which takes for 9 days. At the very beginning stage, nuns were treated as if they are not capable of leading that whole ceremony. So we would invite the monks to lead the ceremony and to do the musical instruments and to prepare the whole ceremony and everything. And we just participated as a participant. But then after a couple of years, I started raising questions, and since I started learning how to lead the rituals, and I said to my friends, why can't we lead this ceremony? And then we put this question to our teacher, and he said, if you can, go ahead. And then we started leading this puja. And still we had the Chipun who, the ritual process was done by the activities that has to be done in a mandala. So that is still carried by monks. And then the instruments that was played also was done by monks, but except that we started leading the puja. We called them umze. And after a couple of years, and it was time that when it was my turn to do the Chipun was the one who actually does the real activity of doing the offerings and taking out the shrines and everything. I said to my teacher, I think I can do it. We don't need the monks to come and do this. And I started that, and I became the first nun to start doing that activity. I took the initiative. I developed that confidence in myself, and I started questioning myself, why can't we do it? And when we put this question to our teacher, and he answered it in a correct way, saying that yes, you can do it, but do it correctly. Yes, of course. So, and once I started, I encouraged the others. And nowadays, the puja is completely done by the nuns. And they do it so beautifully and so dedicatedly and so wonderfully. And even they sound more beautiful when the melodies are carried by women. I mean, their voice are more beautiful than monks, actually, I would say. So I think here what I learn is that in Buddhist culture, whatever tradition has been carried down, I don't, as I said earlier, I'm not good at the historical knowledge of what happened in the past, but somehow through my own experience as a nun, whenever I raised question and then when I tried to get a logical reasoning to this, and I found the right answer. And there was never a moment when I was rejected and said that you're not allowed to do this or you're not allowed to think like that. There was no such thing as not allowed. But somehow it was a great teaching saying that, yes, start thinking. Start questioning yourself. If you, even there is a saying in Tibetan, Ame pula yunde yuna gaden tila dam kame, means there's a gaden tree, means that a throne that is very highly respected in a Tibetan Buddhist culture. If a son of a mother has the qualification or the capability, everyone can claim for that throne. So that somehow the tradition has been somehow carried in a way that it is always we women, our humility is taken advantage as or misinterpreted as an incapability or, something like that, I guess. But somehow I learned that if you step forward and you question yourself and you believe in yourself, there's a way always. So I think the tradition in somehow has been ups and downs in such a way because we women also started stepping behind.
Kunzang, would you like to take on from there and tell us about the women's Sangha in Bhutan?
Good morning. I'm neither a practicing ordained nun or a scholar on nuns and Buddhism, but I would like to share a little bit of my experience or what I know, having worked on what we call the Bhutan Nuns Foundation. It was only by about the 7th century that Buddhism actually came to Bhutan. Before that, we had animistic religious practices. And throughout, you see that nuns didn't have any kind of central role to play. And somehow, I think the numbers, although the women always had some longing for religion and the spiritual practice, they were never significantly seen in the society. I think they just lived with the yearning and the longing to have the knowledge, to have the institutions where they could go to. And although who we consider the second Buddha, Guru Padmasambhava, who is very strong in Bhutan, he said that there is no difference, both men and women can enter the Sangha, and if given a chance, the women would make better renunciate and religious practitioners. But for a long time, the women have always lived in the shadow. As nuns, have always lived in the shadow of the monasteries. They were never significant. They were no significant or big, well-known nunneries. They were more little hermitages where women lived in caves, and many of them went to these places because they were escaping. It was a kind of escape from the society. And nuns were not highly accomplished in academics, or they couldn't question the system or anything like this. And they just lived by praying and just living away from the rest of the world. And we also had the history of having a theocracy for about 200 years, and nuns never played an important role. They were kind of the misfits in society. They went quietly and lived on alms and begging. They were not accomplished. They couldn't perform. They were not able to, did not have access to the knowledge that was stored in the monasteries, and was the libraries were accessible only to the monks. So there was a long history of not deliberate discrimination, but kind of ignored. And it's only now that nunneries are becoming recognized in Bhutan. And compared to about maybe 5,000 or 6,000 monks who are in established monasteries, we just have about 1,000 nuns in about 26 nunneries. And many of these nunneries are not state-funded. They are still by well-known monks who try to support these nunneries, and many of them are supported by communities who feel that nuns are able to perform the rituals that the monks can perform. And it's only now through the foundation that we are trying to see and respect the nuns as potential bodhisattvas and teachers, and that we are capable of doing what the monks have been doing. And it's a difficult shift, because what we always say is we are so used to respecting and revering male teachers and gurus, and we have sort of ignored the capability or the potential of women to be achieving, to have achieved and to be teachers for, and we have to work with the women to respect women nuns.
Thank you, Kunzang. I think what has emerged here is that it's always been much more difficult for women to walk the path in that sense, whether in terms of ordaining full-time as nuns or just following spiritual practices. And my question is to Ranjini. In your book, Portraits of Buddhist Women, you have studied and presented the shifts in attitudes that took place towards women from different walks of life between the 5th and the 13th centuries. And I think that's an important way. I think we should excavate history and look at history, because so many of the attitudes that we get today, the perspectives that we have to face today in our cultures, come from the past, and they are repeated unthinkingly into the present. So could you tell us something about these shifting perspectives towards women?
I'll try. I'm not a historian, but I've just read a little. Okay. In Sri Lanka, when the religion was brought to Sri Lanka in the 3rd century BC, the tradition of monks and nuns had already been fully established in India. So Asoka's son, Mahinda, the King Asoka's son, Mahinda, who was a monk, brought the religion. And not long after, his sister, Sanghamitra, brought the ordination of nuns to Sri Lanka. She ordained nuns in Sri Lanka, and the queen became one of the followers, though not a nun. And it became a very fast-growing and respected organization. And many women joined it, and historically the stories are that there was this phalanx of very competent nuns who carried on the tradition. Now, clearly over time this changed. Maybe the social pressures were too much, maybe the wars and the economic structure that supported these nuns broke down, but the position of the nuns really deteriorated and became very much like what you say, where they were little groups of women who decided they wanted to leave the lay life and made their own communities and lived in far-off places. And over time, they were less educated, they were less accessible to the kinds of support systems that enable them to develop. But in my readings of the literature, the stories of these women, and it's interesting that there are, probably the Buddhist canon is one of the earliest religious canons that includes the voices of women. In the Theravada and the Therigatha, you have two sections of poems where men talk about how they came to the order and women talk about what attracted them to become nuns. And this body of writings has been included as part of the canon and has gone out into the Mahayana tradition as well as the Theravada tradition in the south. So that's a very early key to the role of women and the acceptance of their position as nuns and their abilities. And in my reading of the stories, I found shifts in these attitudes. For example, there is the story of Yasodhara, who was a very shadowy figure in the beginning of the stories about the Buddha's life. But once she becomes a nun and an arahat, she speaks in extremely confident terms in her last, I don't know whether I have the book, I can read a section, but maybe not. There are nuns like Kundalakesi, who were famous for their debating skills, to the point that she learnt more than the nunnery could teach her. So they said, go out and see what you can learn, what more you can learn of the doctrine. And so she set out, and she was such a famous debater that monks would run away when they knew she was coming to the city. She would take her stick, her jambu stick, and plant it on a sand mound at the entrance to a city and say, anyone who wants to debate with me is welcome. And as I said, the story says monks just disappeared, and she would go from place to place. And finally, of course, as often happens in these stories, she meets Sariputta, the Buddha's chief disciple, and they have this confrontation, they have this debate, and finally she cannot answer some of the questions he asks, and then she asks him to be her teacher. So you have women in those early stories who had capacity, who had intelligence, who had enormous intellectual abilities and were respected for it. But the sad thing is that over time, social pressures change. I mean, society changes. That's the nature of Buddhism. Everything changes. And so you have shifting attitudes and shifting pressures. Economic pressures tell on you, social pressures tell on you, introductions from other sources, influences from other sources tell on you. And so the position of nuns changed and has changed dramatically until in the 20th century, again, very interestingly, with nationalism and the Buddhist revival in Sri Lanka and the anti-colonial movement, suddenly politicians decided that they were going to use women again for the nationalist movement, encourage them again to spread Buddhism, to go into education, etc. And again, for a brief period, there were nunneries established, philanthropists supported them, and some very big names in Buddhist education came from that group. But again, after independence, it died down. You know, there's no more interest in the nuns. And again, there was a law. And now, once again, with feminism and the pressure for women to do things, there's a huge push to get back their ordination and re-establish the nunneries.
Thank you, Ranjini. Thank you for also introducing us to the Therigatha, which, as you told us, are the songs of the earliest nuns. And they talk about, in very sparkling terms, the quality of realization. They reveal the quality of realization of the nuns. And I'd just like to read a very short, I mean, they're all very short, but I just wanted to read one, if I may, a translation. So freed, so thoroughly freed am I from 3 crooked things set free, from mortar, pestle, and crooked husband. Having uprooted the craving that leads to becoming, I'm set free from aging and death. And this is written by a nun called Mutta. And I wanted to ask Anila that often, as is evident in this particular song, that for the theories, for the earliest nuns, the path to inner liberation started actually with external liberation, which was being liberated from the gender roles, from the mortar, pestle, and crooked husband. But, so in your life as well, you have, of course, not the husband, but you have left behind. You had a point where, in your early life, you were faced with a childhood that was not so pleasant, and was your entry into the monastic Sangha a way of, external liberation as well as, a path to inner liberation?
I think that's how it begins everywhere, in every religious culture. Suffering is something that really makes you try to look for an alternative choice of way of life. So for me also, though, as you said, I didn't have a husband because I was too young at that time. But the fear of having a husband in life was the biggest reason why I became a nun, actually. I was really terrified by the idea of having a man in my life, because I could clearly see, I had a very clear example of a man in my life at that age was my father. And then the relationship between my mom and dad was kind of something that it was beyond my comprehension, actually. But somehow, I loved them both, but somehow I felt more sympathetic towards my mom because I was closer to her, and then she was more of the victim. And as though I was a young kid, I always was able to make out what is fair and unfair. It is a very clear thing in human nature, I think. You cannot just say that when you're a young child, you are not able to differentiate what is suffering and what is happiness, So I could see a very brutal and very unkind man, how he treats my mother in a very disrespectful way, and makes her cry and suffer, as well as I was going through that too. But the pain that I would have to take on my physical body was not as hard as taking the emotional pain that I was facing. Because whenever you see your mom being beaten up right in front of you, and you're not being able to do anything to protect that person who you love so much in your life, is something very horrible feeling, So somehow to escape that, through that experience, I always imagined that someday when I grow up, I might have to get married to a man who my father would decide who I should be getting married to. And this man would be the same kind of man who would disrespect you and treat you as just like a piece of material that is for his use. And so I was quite terrified about that imagination, and I said, I don't want this. The good thing I feel right now is that I was able to make a choice that time. I said, no, I don't want this life, and I want something else. And then the only alternative, according to our culture, was that to become a nun, because you can't stay home without getting married or without obeying to your parents, So once you become a nun, you're respected as well as you are free, with your life somehow, a much better way of life. That's what attracted me towards becoming a nun. But then, of course, once I entered the nunnery, and there was another best example of a man in the world was my teacher. And this, I always tell people, these two men changed my life to be who I am today. Whatever little bit of admiration that I receive from people, and people think that something good is in me as a human being, is all from them. If I would not have had a father like him who made me take a decision to become a nun, probably I might not have been able to meet a teacher like a Buddha, who who really helped me to transform my way of thinking and seeing things in the world, my whole perception, my whole way of leading life, living life, every moment to moment, being able to rejoice and enjoy, is with the good guidance of a great teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche. So somehow that's how it started, and now I'm more in trying to heading towards more deeper level, so that attracts me more and more towards it.
Now, when we hear about or talk about what Ani Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo has called a second-class spiritual citizenship, she was really talking about her own experience when she joined the Buddhist Sangha and realized that she would, she had no access to the teachings, the great teachings of the Vajrayana masters, which were right there. I mean, she knew they were there. That's why she had joined the Sangha. And they were not accessible to her because she was in the body of a woman. And she questioned, well, not her teacher, but the teachers who were speaking to her. And, she was told that, you to really attain nirvana, you can't do it as a woman. You will have to change out of your female body into a male body to become enlightened, should such a stage occur. And she was so frustrated when she heard that. She said, what is it about a penis that is so important, to become enlightened? And then she made this vow. She said, forget it. I don't want to be born in a male body under these circumstances. And so I made this strong prayer. Even if I can't do that much in this lifetime, in the future, may the stream of consciousness go forward and take on the transitory form of a female rather than a male. And that, Kunzang, if you could tell us how strong this vow actually is from a Buddhist perspective, because she is saying, what she's really saying is that till the end, till however many lifetimes it takes, I want to be born a woman.
From a literary or a scholarly point of view, but from what I know, that we are in Bhutan as women very inspired by women who came in the past, particularly of a princess from India, I don't know from which part of India, Kumari, who came to Bhutan in the 12th century. And she was actually afflicted with leprosy, and she was abandoned, and she had to isolate herself, and then she found her way to the mountains of Bhutan. And she started this practice of fasting and meditating and keeping silence. I think she was known as Kumari in India, and in Bhutan she's known as Kelong Mapelma. And she proved that even in the body of a woman, if you are motivated and if you're focused, that you can actually attain nirvana. And for non-scholars, because Bhutan became a literate society only about 50 years ago, and most of what we lived by and what we knew was through the oral tradition, and her story has been very important for women, because for a long, long time, many of the nuns in Bhutan were not literate. They were not educated. They just were having the devotion and the faith and the belief that they can achieve enlightenment. And she showed that even with her crippled body, a mind that is focused and pointed, that you can achieve enlightenment. And she's a source of inspiration to many women practitioners in Bhutan. And we have places in Bhutan which are still revered, and the rituals of fasting and silence is what we do. We don't have to know the academics of Buddhism, or we don't have to know the biographies and the practices. Just by concentrating on fasting and silence, that she would achieve. And for that, what she did for the Bhutanese women, and I'm sure for the Tibetan world too, it was a very liberating thing, that you could just by introspecting, thinking, and observing silence, that you could be liberated. And I think that was very empowering. And even today, if you go to the sites where she actually visited physically in the 12th century, we still observe this, and you will find it's mostly women there who have not read books, who don't know the history of Buddhism, but that they can take control of their mind, their body, and their speech and get enlightened.
Thank you, Kunzang. In the latter half of the 20th century, and of course the 21st, the gender debate has begun engaging organized religions, and all religions have had to respond to what the questions that the gender debate that the women have been asking in terms of their place and and the access that they have to teachings and to positions of authority within religions. And I think it's been happening in Buddhism as well. And I would like all the panelists to briefly reflect on this with an added thought that isn't a Buddhist feminist a contradiction in terms, because Buddhism talks about no self, anatta, and anatma, and to peg anything into solidity, whether it's identity or gender or whatever, it would seem sort of out of place in a doctrine or a philosophy that talks about no self in that sense. So if you could please, all of you, just reflect on this.
What I've learned in my life is that when you talk about selflessness, is that when I was a really young teenage nun, I mean, when I first entered a nunnery, I was just 13, and then during time when I was growing up, there was another monk who used to be my teacher's attendant who would cook for him. And he was always kind of poking me, provoking me all the time, saying, "Oh, you Kemin." Kemin is the word called lower birth. And I used to get really provoked and angry, and I want to beat him up somehow. But then, of course, I can't do that because I was a small girl. And somehow I was really annoyed by that. And one day I went to my teacher and said, "Rinpoche, why everyone says we are Kemin, we lower birth? Why are we really lower birth?" And he says, no, don't think like that. That's his ignorance. And then as he would talk to a little girl, he said, "Do you know why the word is Nima is there? The word for the sun is called Nima. There is a word called Ma in it. Do you know why there's Pa Ma? Ma is there. And why there is a word also hanging on to La Ma, a teacher, Ma? That is because it is emphasized, their quality is emphasized on a quality of a motherly, that is nurturing, that's giving life, that is like soul care. The quality is always there. And then similarly, I think I'm kind of getting carried away by this. And my teacher said those things to me. And then, see, most important thing, don't forget that where we all men come from, So don't worry. You women are very, very important in Vajrayana practice. Without you, achieving enlightenment is impossible. And that gave me such a courage in my heart, and went back to that monk and says, "You know why there is such a thing called Lama and Nima and Pama?" So I think it's, and the compassionate teacher always is able to invoke the proper attitude in each and every individual of his students. I think it's how you are able to give that valuable, essential teaching to that follower, I think, is also depending on it. And regarding the historical thing, as far as I've understood, though I'm not good at historical stories and how it came about and this and that, but somehow whenever I come across, like regarding the first, the Bhikkhuni Sangha was established, when there was first rejection, then there was questioning, and there was reasoning, and then again it was established. And that probably was a very skillful way of a teacher to establish that whole discussion around, to bring out what are the, pros and cons, like things that can be coming up, so that to tackle those things. So probably teacher says, okay, no first, and then somebody questions why, and then there occurs the reasoning, and then that's how it kept on changing by the time in society. Though there is a definite discrimination in monastic field as well also, I definitely experienced this myself. But I would not say they would do it intentionally, but very sadly but truly, ignorantly, it has been carried down as a tradition. Because I remember once I was in the process of establishing my own school for little nuns, you know. I believe that I always experience that when I'm a little young nun, I love to play. I'm not so serious about sitting down and meditating. I want to run around. I'm curious about things around the world. Even when there's a cinema, it's a colorful thing. I'm kind of curious. I'm distracted. It's an obvious thing. My intellectual growth was kind of very activated. So, and then the older nuns would always expect you to sit and quiet, and you know, and I felt like maybe this is not the right thing to be done. Maybe at this time we must be trained, given a proper way of active action to be done, which is to study. So since then I always had the wish to have a school for nuns, where it was almost next to impossible thing to go to a school for nuns and have an academic education, and especially to go for higher academic education, where at that time plenty of higher academic institutes were existing in every monastery. And then somehow this desire started, and then that's how it started. And then now my little ones are playing, at the same time studying and understanding, being brought up in a way that they are able to not only develop their intellectual capacity, but also the spiritual capacity, because they are able to grow in such an environment where love and respect is very much into implementation in day-to-day life, way of life, moment-to-moment way of life. And during the time when I was into the process of establishing the school, I met a master, a scholar called Kempo. And I requested him that if sometime he could come and teach sometime. And he said, oh, that's easy. I will definitely come and teach at your school sometime. I said, oh, that would be wonderful. So when can you come? I'll see. But, you know, teaching nuns will be easy. I said, what? Why do you say that? And he says, well, what do they need to learn? They don't need to learn much, so it's just a little thing, you know. And that kind of made me feel so bad about it. And I said, you are a scholar, how can you say such a thing? And that's where you really see that somehow, not only in the religious field, I would say, even in the lay, day-to-day way of life, women seem to always have to face a harder way of life. They always have to really struggle more than man does sometimes. But maybe men emotionally does struggle, but they don't try to show it. Maybe women are more blessed to be able to show their emotion, and then by crying or by doing anything, they just move forward.
Thank you, Anila. I think it's time for some questions now. So if you could please put up your hands.
Yep, we have a question here.
Good morning. I just want to ask how much the applicable the idea of feminism in the religious activities and process. As we know that Buddha's teaching are very liberal and flexible, but still there are some restrictions and demarcations. So how much is applicable the idea of feminism? And if we really want a significant revolution in the Tibetan Buddhism, especially for the women, as Anila mentioned, that the Gadin Tipa and such things, so who has the real power and the obligation to make a change? Because I cannot say I do not want this and make a change. So who is the man or some leader who has the real obligation to make a significant change? Thank you.
Ranjini, would you like to take the first part of the question?
I think the way Buddhism has spread in the world, it's spread in different ways in different parts of the world. And I think the kind of, Sri Lanka has been perhaps a little luckier than other places, because when it spread, when Buddhism came to Sri Lanka, it really took over the whole country in a sense. And in doing so, a lot of the basic principles of education, the importance of literacy, the importance that you had to be able to access the texts, etc., became quite widespread. And so the tradition of scholarship permeated both the nuns and the monks. And that basic tradition has filtered down, even with the ups and downs and the social changes that have taken place. That basic tradition has filtered down, that basic Buddhist openness to study and learning, that you've got to read and understand for yourself. And the kind of permissiveness without the rigidity of religious ritual has seeped into the society. And so, in a sense, that's what gave us a high literacy. When independence came, and the first two things they made was free education for the whole country. And within a generation, men and women were in the universities and were going through the school system. Even the poorest farmer, if he had a bright daughter and a not so bright son, would encourage the daughter to achieve as far as she would go, because it made also social differences. It meant money, economic differences, education brought in other things. So there was this push for education. And in that sense, I think Sri Lanka has been lucky that we have had a widespread openness to education, both for men and women. But again, things change in society. And with different kinds of issues, different kinds of value systems come in, with the colonialism and the Puritanism that came in, and the Victorian ethics that came into society. I know when I was going to university, I came from a family which was much more rooted in the Buddhist tradition. And I was allowed, it never occurred to me that I wouldn't go to university. It never occurred to me that if I was good, I would go as far as I want to go. But I know my friends in the same class going to schools in Colombo with me who were much more influenced by the social mores of the early 20th century, where women were, if you were high class, you were not allowed to do certain things, that they were not allowed to go to university with me. So it depended very much on the changes in society, the changes in the social mores, the value systems that came in with the changes in the culture. But as I said, for us, education has been a big, open world. And that was why both men and women in Sri Lanka have it. Now the pressures were different. Feminism has come in, and with it, the desire to get more, especially because of the differences that were going on in the later 20th century. So I don't know how to answer the question. It's just that it occurs now with women, with nuns. The monk order, the monastic order, there's something about monasticism, and with the development of a rigid monasticism that immediately puts women in a different place. And that, I think, is questions of celibacy, questions of sexuality, fears of celibacy, fears of sexuality that have operated. And if I take a first century text and see how women are treated in those first century texts, and take a 13th century text where monasticism has been highly established, the attitude to women is significantly different in the telling of a same story. So that's the kind of thing that happens.
We have a question at the front here.
Morning. Morning, can you hear me?
Yes.
My first question is to the three of you, please.
If you could stand up and just raise your voice, thank you.
My first question is three of you, please. What do you think of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, and that Nam-myoho Renge Kyo is the essence of the Lotus Sutra? And the second question is for Anila, please. Would you say that you need a living guru in order to achieve enlightenment? They say that, so would you agree with that?
May I please, intervene? I think the first question is not appropriate for this panel, but the second question, Anila, please go ahead.
Well, for me, in my life, Guru has been the greatest source of strength and understanding about the reality, and to confront with everything that you think sometimes is kind of very harsh on you, and to develop, to transform those harsh incidents into more as a strength. and to use it as a opportunity to see what reality is there, and not only you, but how everyone is suffering under such kind of thing. And that helped me to develop an attitude where I felt like, okay, not only me is the person who wants to be free from this kind of harsh and reality, but there are many. So that's why how I started to work on establishing the school for nuns in Nepal. So I think it depends on how individual understanding capacity and are able to feel and convenience with the teacher. If somebody thinks that he doesn't need a teacher, I don't know how that will work, but I cannot say that he must have a teacher. But somehow, according to what I've understood and learned, teacher is someone who really can help you a lot.
Okay, we have another question here. Can I just... Sorry, sir, I did see you. We're trying to get to everybody. Just one question per person because we have very limited time. Thank you.
My comment is directed to Kunzang. I enjoyed reading your book, Circle of Karma. I discovered it quite accidentally a few months ago. And it was the first book from Bhutan that I ever read. I find it very interesting that your protagonist, she's comes out of poverty, completely illiterate, without a teacher, and yet she chooses to become a nun without ever really being ordained. And I didn't know that that was possible in Buddhism at all. So could you and Anila comment on that?
Thank you so much. I think I'm glad to know that somebody has read my book. And as I said, I know very little about the subject of nuns and religion and things like this. But I've felt if I could, in my story, show that women don't have to go through all the rigors of institutions to get ordained, and I think the battle for complete ordination is still going on, but I wanted to show that there are people, there are teachers among us who have the strength and the courage to take the shortcut. If the person is fully dedicated to becoming, practicing religion, that nothing should stop. That, in fact, when I describe how she gets ordained, is just actually very similar to what I've been reading Ani's book. When at the age of 11, you went to your teacher, and it was exact at the age of 10 how she, from the very unfair conditions in your home, you just went to this teacher and said, I want to be a nun, and he just cuts off a piece of your hair and says, you're ordained. And this is exactly what I was imagining, and this actually happened. So this is just my imagination of how we do that as women. We could actually take the shortcuts if somebody is at the end of your shortcut to receive you and guide you.
I'm so sorry, we're going to have to finish up in just a second, but a quick one, sir.
Good morning. My question is directed to Anila, and you were saying that the most person that you influenced was by your teacher, right? Who was a male. It was a male monk. And you said that your teacher was very different, from other males, that you faced a lot of discrimination from other monks who were males. So how can you say you're not the product, because your teacher was also male, How come you're not product of that same environment, How can you differentiate from that? Because see, let me finish. Yeah, no, I've got one more point. And see, no disrespect to you, but I've seen many things, teacher-student relationships, and there's one thing that one teacher told to a girl, that you should not look at the teacher's fault, at any teacher's fault, but just the idea and the teaching. So that's a way of how people actually are brainwashed, especially young girls. So, but then I just want to ask you, how do you differentiate? Because you are a product of that same environment. Thank you.
I think it's very clear. I mean, we all live in a world where they're both good and bad both exist. Exactly. But it's up to us, every individual, what you choose to take from this world. Just because both bad and good exist here, you just take both? No. But you have the choice. I think you're an intellectual being. I think you have the capacity. You have the capacity to use your most simple thing is common sense. And I think as long as we all not, even though we are not highly educated or intellectual, at least if we are able to start to use our simple common sense, I think we will be able to make our right choice in our life. It's all about using your common sense, I think. And right or wrong in that sense. I mean, good or bad, everywhere. Where there are God, there are, demons exist, as we all know. So why do we go to a temple? We choose to go to a temple because we believe in the truth. We believe in the goodness. That's it, I think.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ranjini, Anila, Kunzang, and thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please accept
you,
these
everyone.
scarves as a gesture of thanks from the JLF. And I'm so sorry there was a couple of questions there that I know we didn't get to, but our esteemed panelists are going to go over to our author signing desk. Please, any questions, photographs, signatures, anything, please take them over there because we have another session starting here very shortly. Thank you so much for all your patience. If anybody lost a pair of glasses, I found a pair on their reading glasses.